Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it, not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences, such as...
The 2CV race was the first time that I actually had the words Tourette's on the race car. So although people know and around me know, I don't think specifically all of the racing drivers specifically know that I have Tourette's.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network. Hey everybody, it's Ben. Such a cool episode today. It's a little bit longer than usual. There's so much good stuff in it. Has the nice casual pace of a good long-form conversation. And really, it's one where we really kind of get rolling with it the deeper we go. I'll talk more about it in a minute. After the conversation, at the end of the episode, we'll talk about a little giveaway we'll be doing courtesy of Esther Quaintmere, our guest this week. So stick around after the show for that. I want to give a shout out to a new podcast I learned about. It'll definitely interest some of you. It's called the Misphonia podcast. The first episode just launched. You might already know what misphonia is, but it's, misphoniapodcast.com says it really simply. Misphonia is a neurological disorder that makes a person extremely sensitive to certain sounds. And what's cool is the podcast itself has really soft production. There's a soft bed of noise that plays in the background underneath the talking. Just really thoughtful in terms of production. I got a really nice note from Adil Ahmad, who does the podcast. He has an amazing radio voice, by the way. And he said Tourette's podcast was, I guess, partial inspiration, which is really, really cool of him to say. But I'm really loving what I can learn from this podcast. Because while I don't have misphonia, my wife does. And now the Misphonia podcast exists that I can look forward to because I can sit in on a conversation between two people who have misphonia, so I can hear them talking authentically and learn what it's like by absorbing their perspectives on it. So my wife has tried to describe it to me, what she feels, when she's hearing. So here's a good example from just recently when we had a flight. The flight attendants, they come around with bags of snacks and everybody gets them. So this whole airplane, this tight, congested airplane, is just alive with the sound of people struggling to open these polypropylene bags, which are really loud, and then the sound of them, kind of munching on the chips and pretzels and then licking their fingers and then balling up the empty bag. Ambrose was squeezing my arm with torque power because the sounds were so under her skin. Like she was on fire hearing this stuff and bearing with it. On an airplane, what can you do? I have to remind myself all the time that I need to be more self-aware about the sounds that I make around her, how I can be respectful, workable alternatives. And I've done bits of research online, but, just like with Tourette Syndrome, it's hard to really get a good idea of lived experience, without hearing longer form conversations with the people who have it. So a big shout out to Adil Ahmad for starting the Misphonia podcast, misphoniapodcast.com. And no, that was not a paid spot. Just want to give a shout out. I've gotten some really great responses to the last episode and the focus on Motherless Brooklyn, the new film from Ed Norton based on the Jonathan Lethem book. So the movie's main character, played by Norton, has TS, and it's portrayed in a much better way, especially the subtleties. Much better than we usually see. Shout out to Tom White, who I met in Minneapolis recently. He shared some really good thoughts with me on the movie this week. He identified with Norton's character, Lionel, more often than not, as did I. And so on the last episode of Tourette's podcast, I quoted something from the movie. It was one of Lionel's lines, the Ed Norton character. And it was just something that really resonated with me. And I'll go ahead and admit, I don't know if these quotes are exclusive to the movie or if they were in the book as well, but Tom pointed out lines like, "It's like there's glass in my brain." There's another one that says, "It's as though I live with an anarchist, but yet everything has to be in its exact place." End quote. And those were lines I really should have mentioned last week because they're great. So thanks to Tom for reminding me. So the character Lionel, he's a private detective with Tourette Syndrome and OCD. There's more coming on this. Stay tuned for something very soon. Thanks to everybody who weighed in on the movie. And keep doing it, tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Everybody's had positive comments about the movie, Motherless Brooklyn, which somehow I can't pronounce very well. Among the people who wrote in, everybody had nice things to say, except for one person who admitted she had not seen it yet, but thought it seemed exploitative, like based on the plot of the movie. Couldn't he have just been a detective without TS? Like, why did that have to be brought into it? Is TS being approached warmly or simply because it's quirky and entertaining? So that was one sort of apprehensive email I got. But we did hear from Ed Norton himself in the last episode saying that, what his take was on it, and that TS and its role in the film was more about telling the story of how humans need to take time to take care of one another and understand each other. And TS is a great amplification of something like that, something that's ultimately widely relatable. And I totally dig that. I also dig our guest this week. Esther Quaintmere is from the UK, and have you ever asked yourself what goes through the mind of a race car driver with Tourette Syndrome? We learned that today from Esther, who has the Tourette's podcast logo on her race car, or the race car she has access to. She's competed with it on there, which, that's one thing I can't stop talking about. It's a life highlight I never expected, having the podcast logo on a race car. But this is a great talk. We take our time. We talk at one point about the really tough insecurity some of us can face about our TS and how it comes out. Meaning, like, if your tics, aren't quite as bad as they used to be, or if they're not as severe as someone else's, you kind of get this imposter feeling of like, do I really have TS? Like a scale of comparison that may have people on one end wondering if they're worthy of the community. And of course you are. But I've heard it come up a lot in emails, a few emails anyway. Like, I was diagnosed as a kid. The tics aren't quite what they used to be. I still have that TS feeling, and they're still, I still feel connected to it, but maybe the online discussion groups are for more severity, and am I welcome there? Like, you got to be this tall to ride this ride at the carnival. And we talk about that and what impact that can have on your psyche when you're definitely part of the community, but you question your own acceptance. People who don't have TS but do have another kind of tic disorder say similar things like, am I allowed in your TS group? I've gotten emails like that before. Like, I want to join the Tourette's podcast discussion group on Facebook, but I don't have TS. I have a different kind of tic disorder. Yes, of course, please. Absolutely. Like, everybody with sincerity is allowed in the discussion group. But this is a good reminder that the Tourette Association of America, who sponsors this podcast, isn't exclusively about Tourette. They've got other tic disorders covered too. This is practically one big thing in terms of awareness needs and personal experiences. But with Esther, so we talk about that, but it gets really interesting later on in the episode when she describes a certain kind of tic that has come about for her. And there's a lesson in it. But we start out talking about the weird and conflicting intersection of a brain that is Tourettic and chaotic, but also wired for the exactitude of engineering and science. Measurements, which feels kind of close to the quote from Lionel earlier about the anarchist. Here's me and Esther, and stick around after. We'll talk about a little giveaway that Esther is making possible.
My name is Esther Quaintmere. I come from Yorkshire in the UK. I work for Ideal Standards, doing toilets. They do toilets. So I'm a computational fluid dynamic engineer. So I simulate a flushing toilet. I'm about to move to Ideal Boilers. So I'm going to simulate boilers and fire and combustion and those sorts of things. I am also a PhD student, so I have submitted my PhD. So nice. I'm waiting for my Viva in January. So it's very weird to have time off. And then I'm also part of a racing team. I think that defines me.
Yeah. That's since you shared those pictures of the Tourette's podcast logo on your race car. That was like the coolest day of my life was seeing that. And I want to get to that, but talking about what you do professionally and the PhD that you're pursuing, I guess all of that is related. The PhD would kind of be a continuation of the work you're already doing, or?
Yeah, so it's using the skill of CFD, computational fluid dynamics, which basically is simulating fluid flow. So for my PhD, it was turbines. For my current job, it's flushing toilets. And then for my future job, which I start in a couple of weeks, it'll be heat transfer and those sorts of things. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So that's that's everything. That's the sort of usability, the management of resources, efficiency, and
So we take we have a computer software, and the first step is to simulate a flushing toilet, which is a lot harder than people think. To
Yeah,
get the actual, because water and any fluid is quite hard to predict, and it has a lot of calculations and maths behind it. So so you've got to there's a lot of hours and struggles and making the simulation, and then once you've got it made and validated against some sort of test data, then it's the fun part of optimizing something, making it more efficient, making it.
So, that's so cool, because I'd never really thought about that. I mean, I guess I should, but that that a toilet is a feat of engineering to where I'd never really consciously thought of that.
So I started my job in February, and for the first sort of 6 months I was flush testing, and there was so much that goes into flush testing that you would not know.
Yeah.
There's to simulate certain things they use sausages or artificial sausages. And the US toilets are very different to the UK toilets in design and shape. I noticed that when I went to New York last year. So interesting stuff.
What is interesting about that to you? Is it just the sort of, because I guess I get mystified by kind of consumer products sometimes, to where you think about the iterations that it went through before it got to be this, this perfect thing that I'm holding in my hand right now or interacting with. And I'm kind of a learning junkie, I guess, and I'd love knowing how things work. I think conceptually imagining things is something that kind of is one of the reasons why I'm so interested in production and audio and photography and video and composition and kind of making, kind of pulling things together to where they make sense. And how'd you get into sort of that field of thinking?
So I always wanted to be an engineer from when I was quite young, because I saw a clock and it was really interesting, and I couldn't figure out how it worked, and it was this like mystery and that sort of thing. And then I went to uni, and I did automotive and mechanical as my undergrad, and then I went straight mechanical because I wanted cars to be a hobby and not an actual job.
Okay.
So then I kind of was like, I don't know a lot about the simulation of fluid. Fluid is like this mystery. It's, it can be represented in numbers and maths and equations, but actually it still is this mystery. So it kind of went, well, I'll do a PhD and then so it kind of went that way. And that's how I sort of got into it. But I love it because it's like mystery. It's like solving mysteries. It's like trying to think of different ways of doing it. I think my dyslexic brain likes that sort of different thinking. So yeah.
Yeah, that I mean, not to make too cheesy of a segue, but I mean, the sort of mysterious nature of TS is, I think, kind of, I think the more and more I do this podcast, the sort of the curiosity gap or the level of mystery.
I think for me, I agree. But on the other hand, it's been hard to come to terms with the Tourette's, because I can't mathematically say this with water, for example. I can mathematically predict what's going to happen, and that seems really mysterious, but I can actually break it down to maths and like little tick boxes, and like, whereas with the Tourette's, there's no tick boxes, there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, I think with my engineering brain, it's really hard not to, because I'm always looking for a root cause, so I'm always looking for a tick trigger and like that sort of thing. And I think once I've got the tick trigger in my head, it sets it off worse, and then it makes it worse, and it sort of sends me spiraling. So
what does that mean for you in terms of your level of, I mean, it sounds like there's a level of discomfort with TS. What about in terms of, the self-acceptance and being open about it? Or you don't have to be open about anything you don't want to, but just you do want to be comfortable with the things in your life that are, fairly somewhat dominant, influential factors. Where are you with that and your comfort level with your TS and your acceptance of it?
So my acceptance of my Tourette's is very low. I think at the moment, I had a moment in sort of sort of February to June this year where I was quite accepting of it, and then it just has slid back to suppressing and not accepting it. I think possibly it's got slightly easier, but I just struggle. It's difficult because I struggle with acceptance, but I'm very open about it. So I will tell everybody that I meet that I have Tourette's, and I'll be like, I have Tourette's, like this is a thing. And then I won't tick and they won't see anything. And then, cause it's hard because I like to mention my Tourette's in a way which it's normal. So it'll be like, oh, I'm going to my Tourette support group, or like, oh, you know, and then it's sort of like you've mentioned it, but you haven't said like full on.
Yeah, like a conversation. I mean, that's a really good way to start it. Are people, I mean, where do people take that?
I think people just sort of note it and just be like, yeah, okay, that's it. And then it sort of opens up so that like if I said like something else, then it could trigger a conversation, or it could not. And if it doesn't, then that's fine. And if it does, then it's fine either way. I think my boyfriend taught me because I wanted to bring some of the Tourette's people to the track, and I was like, oh, we need to tell everyone. How are we going to tell everyone? And he was like, I'll just send a text that says, some of Esther's Tourette support group are coming to the thing. And that was it. And like a year later, one of the drivers approached me and he said, I know somebody that just has a kid that's just been freshly diagnosed. I immediately thought of you. Can you help them? Can you talk to them? Can you like, what do I say to them type thing? So I think if you just like have it in conversation, and then like, even if it's not right then and there that you have the talk, it just makes it like sort of more normal, I think.
We talk about this on episodes all the time of sort of what's the best way, what's the secret to, you know, kind of bringing it up in conversation and getting people to understand it and understand you for you at the same time, and not have people have runaway thoughts about, you know, that are kind of, you know, driven by stereotypes and everything. And, you know, when people don't ask and when people don't follow up with you, or they, you know, maybe it's just the kind of thing where they're like, well, you know, should I ask about this? Is it prying, or is it, you know, like they brought it up, but maybe I should just kind of like leave it at that? Or how often does it come up where you do have a conversation with somebody about TS and sort of your experience with it? And I guess how would you gauge how well that goes in terms of them kind of still just kind of seeing you for you?
Yeah, so it's hard because I suppress so much, which is a bad thing, and I just shouldn't do it, but I do.
It's understandable though.
Yeah, so everyone at work knows. So in my office, they all know, and my line manager has told everyone else, because I was like, I just want everyone to know, and then it's not a dirty little secret. It's just out. It's just open. That's a thing. And then I was flush testing with some temps and their sort of manager, and I was in the office, and I think I must have just said something like, I don't even know. I think I must have just said the word or something in a sentence, and the guy was like, yeah, because, you know, your line manager told me you had Tourette's and I haven't seen it. And then it just completely sparked a conversation. I think if somebody like asked you, and if you bring it up in a natural way, then it's somebody that is interested to learn more will then ask you, and then you can be like, well, yeah, you know, I do suppress and you haven't seen it because I do suppress, and it's not healthy for me, and it's, you know, I feel tired and I have the headaches and I feel crap, but I just can't get them out, like, sort of thing. So I think I think the way that I tell people in sort of just doing it naturally, and it makes it a little bit hard because I haven't explained all the comorbids and I haven't explained everything else, and they don't understand. But then I'm just trying to make it normal. And if they do want to ask more questions, then they can always ask more questions.
That's the right way to do. That's the trick, I think, is because trying to like straighten that out in a quick conversation where, you're just kind of telling somebody for the first time, that's a lot. I mean, that's inundating. If I tried to give somebody like a quick primer on what TS is, I feel like it would be less successful than if we just started talking about, kind of my day and like, well, if you don't notice this, kind of here's what's happening. And you just kind of said it in the context of yourself, because with Tourette being as dynamic as it is, it's, you could explain something that has nothing to do with somebody else's experience with TS.
I think it also makes it easier for the next person. So, for example, I used to demonstrate in uni. I used to demonstrate for labs, and I used to say, I'm your demonstrator. I might say something wrong. I have dyslexia, so I might spell stuff wrong. Don't look at my spellings. And I used to be like, I also have Tourette's, so I might have involuntary movements. And then I used to just get on with it. I did have somebody that was like, they just was like, oh, well, Tourette's like the South Park thing. And I was like, not really. But
Right.
but I kind of just moved on. And I think that because I did that every time I met a new group, and I was doing that sort of every week. And so that's, I don't know, 30 people that have heard the word Tourette's, linked it with somebody that doesn't quite tick, because I didn't tick that much in labs, but it makes it easier for the next person who comes along and says, oh, I have Tourette's. They can be like, oh, I had that lab demonstrator and she had Tourette's, and she didn't swear, and like, so it links it a bit more with a more positive vision, I think. So
because I kind of feel like people like to be up on things and do like to be educated on things when they finally get to it, or when that piece of information that they have that's straight and accurate, and they can feel proud of knowing that that's a fact and they have a better understanding of it. I feel like that's the kind of effective thing where people like to share that frame of reference of like, oh, I worked with this girl, Esther, who, she had TS, and we talked about, here's how she explained it, and it made a lot of sense to me. And just, that's the trick. I feel like, I don't know if I've been way too long-winded on this and it's the most obvious thing ever, but it's a question that comes up of like, how do you do it? And how do you have that conversation? And I think that's the right answer of just, keeping it in the context of yourself, because, you can talk about that better than you could about somebody else's experience.
So I think one thing that you just said is like, I think people like to have more information. And I was talking to the HR person, because I was doing my closing interview, because she was there on my first day. And on my first day, I was like, I have Tourette's. Like on my first day at the job, I was like, to the health and safety guy, I was like, I have tic attacks and they look like seizures, and I have the middle finger tic, and I might do it in someone's face. I'm reeling off all of these tics that I might or might not have, and then I'm saying, but I do suppress, so you might not see them, and obviously they sort of took the worst case of that, but. I talked to the HR lady, and I was like, well, what could I have said? Should I have said them all? Should I have? And she was like, I wish that the company had told me earlier, maybe, because then I could have done research. But then she was like, but you know what? Everyone with Tourette's is different. So I don't think I would have been more prepared. And I thought that was really good, because she'd picked up on the fact that not everyone has Tourette's is the same. And she has a little bit of more knowledge of sort of my Tourette's and how that works and stuff. But it was nice that she said that if she'd have known, she would have researched it. But then on the other hand, when I first got diagnosed a few years ago, I sort of got a bit mad at my mom. And I was like, Mom, you research everything and you Google everything, but you don't care about my Tourette's enough to Google it. And she's like, no, Esther, I have Googled it and I've watched YouTube videos, and they scare me. Like, they terrify me. They because she was seeing like the worst cases, and she was like, I don't know how you're going to get a job, and I don't know how you're going to hold a job. And I was like, oh no, my mom said that. Like, how am I going to get a job? And I think for her, the this podcast has been amazing for her, because she can hear like the positive sides, and she doesn't understand it, and she's trying her hardest, and she's your Patreon, so she Patreon supports you, and she is so
that's so cool.
Is so proud of the fact that she Patreon supports you. She's like, oh, I'm a Patreon. So yeah,
that is awesome.
She just loves your like podcast, and it's helped her. To be fair, she's like, have you heard the latest episode, and that sort of thing. So I think
so cool.
The podcast for her has helped her to accept my Tourette's, and the podcast for me has helped me for because videos set me off ticking. I if they just set me off within seconds, it's because I suppress, it's tick attack mode. So the podcast is that way of hearing about Tourette's, but not being set off for me, which is that sort of lifeline. So I can do it. And I always know when I'm not doing very well, and I haven't, like, I'm falling back into denial and like not accepting the Tourette's because I stopped listening to the podcast, and I'm like, I'm like closing myself away from everything, and I don't want the Tourette's. So I'm like not even listening to the podcast. And then I'm like, actually, that's so yeah.
What, I guess, form does the suppression take? Is that just kind of, you do it, but you kind of adapt it, like you adapt the tick into something that's a little bit more normal and less conspicuous, or are you finding ways to like really kind of sit on them until you can kind of get to a place where you can release everything at once?
So it's sort of tension, like not relaxing, kind of suppressing, I would say.
Okay.
I started my tics 3.5 years ago. So I say that I always had Tourette's. There were always, looking back now, there were always, I was known as the random queen, because I was always making little sounds and that sort of thing. And so looking back, there were kind of signs. My mom is like, I didn't see anything. And I think that's part of the guilt that she has, that she missed this massive thing of me. And I'm like, well, it was small and I didn't notice it, and nobody noticed it, and it didn't bother anyone. Yeah. So like that was fine. But like a few years ago, it just exploded out, and I was scared and all this sort of thing. And so the coping strategy that I had was that unknowingly I would suppress in form of like just being really tense, and then I would get to my boyfriend, who I'd only been going out for about a month before like this full-blown Tourette's just exploded out of me. Well,
oh wow.
It wasn't full-blown Tourette's. So it, like, people have these things where it's like, oh, people have Tourette's and then they have full-blown, and then and I'm like, well, that's I find that hard, because I feel like I have like fake Tourette's. I'm like, well, you see people on TV and they're like ticking all the time, and I'm like, well, I'm not doing that. And it's really hard. I think once you start having a scale of anything, like it's really hard.
Yeah.
So to me, it was like, whew, here it is. But to somebody else, like who's had Tourette's for ages, it would be like, well, actually, that's not a lot. And looking back on it, I didn't tick as much as I do now, sort of thing.
Yeah, but that's a good point. That's an interesting point. That's something that I've heard other people say, is that they kind of feel like imposters in a way, because their TS is not necessarily at the standard portrayal level, I guess you could say, where, and like that is TS, but it's so different for other people. You could have really, really mild TS, but be in a position where you don't have any social support. People are making fun of you. It's, or you can have really, really, I guess we'll say, quote unquote, severe TS, and be in an environment that's really accommodating and comfortable, and things aren't so bad. The whole scale thing, and people who also have tic disorders who are not, that isn't Tourette syndrome. I've heard from some people saying that I have a tic disorder, It's not TS, but I still tick, but I don't feel like I have that community because it doesn't count as TS. And
mine was labeled as a tic disorder for like a year, and that just sent my head spinning.
Yeah.
I was like, well, you know, am I fake? Should I go on the Tourette's like Facebook group? Should I not? Should I go to the support groups? And like the support groups are amazing. They're just like, well, you know, if you tick, then this just come to a group type thing. But yeah, I do struggle with feeling fake. But then it was interesting because I went to the Manchester support group, and there was a girl there, and she just exploded. And you would say it was severe. It was my first Tourette support group, and it was all very daunting. And then sort of she came in, and you know, I know them now, and they're sort of my Tourette's parents, because you know they have 2 kids and they're just lovely. But she had like, you could say she had severe Tourette's, but she said like, I feel fake. Like it's almost she said it was almost like the OCD part of it was saying that, you know, this was all fake. She was making this up. And so I think a lot of people struggle with the feeling of just like, and I think if you can suppress as well, then it's like, well, I can suppress, so therefore I must be putting it on when I can't suppress type thing. So yeah, I just don't limit my suppression. It's like, I was talking to my therapist the other week, and she was like, it's like when you break a leg, like you're told you can walk a little bit, but like not to walk a lot. And like your suppression, you know, you can suppress a little bit, but not all the time. And you're just trying to, you know, you've broken your leg and you're trying to like walk a marathon. Like you can't do that. You have to limit, you know, your suppression skills. So
yeah, and I'm glad we're talking about it this way, because I guess for anybody listening who doesn't have TS, suppression doesn't mean you have control. It's not, you know, it's still an involuntary thing. And you know, with Tourette's and tics and all that, I mean, you can take medication that will influence you too, but it's still not anything. You're not cured just because you can suppress. It's a very stressful thing, and it can lead to tic attacks. It can cause all kinds of pressure that has to come out at some point, and it could, you know, you could exacerbate your tics and make them worse by suppressing. And this is going to be different from, you know, person to person, but I just wanted to clarify that for anybody who's listening and thinks, well, if you can suppress your tics, it's not really a problem. But it still kind of fits in with the whole problem of it and how you kind of deal with it in your life. And yeah, just want to say that for anybody who had that question on their minds, because suppression is difficult.
Yeah, I liken it to needing the toilet. So like you can possibly go like hours, and some people can't go hours, and some people, you know, need to go all the time. But some people can go hours without going to the toilet. If you know, there's a great Dad's Army sketch about like somebody needing to go to the toilet, and then somebody sings a poem about a pee, and it makes them want to go to the toilet. So things like, for me with the Tourette's, it feels like going to the toilet, and then, you know, if you're thinking about the fact that you need to go to the toilet, or thinking about the fact you need to tick, you're obviously going to want to tick more.
That's a great analogy.
Then you can do something else, and you might forget you need to go to the toilet, and you know, you sort of forget that you need to tick. And then I went to the gym the other week, and I was like, so the gym feels like somebody pressing on my bladder. Like it exasperates my tics. It makes me want to tick. The whole situation, the whole, you know, the anxiety that comes up with it, the OCD that starts kicking in, the needing to do everything perfectly, needing to, you know, smash out the rep really hard, and that sort of thing. And the fact that I've linked high heart rate to a tic attack in my head makes it so every time I have a high heart rate, I then have a panic attack, because I'm going to so like going to the gym is like someone pressing on my bladder. So it makes me, you know, why would you want to go into a situation where someone is going to press on your bladder? You're not going to. And then if you're panicking about someone pressing on your bladder, like if someone even comes near to your bladder, you'll have a panic attack. So I try and explain it with the pee analogy. It kind of gets a bit weird, but the other part is
it's good though.
Somebody's like, oh, well, why don't you just stop suppressing? And I'm like, so if I stop suppressing, it's like going into the middle of the room, dropping my trousers and just peeing on the floor. Like it's that hard. Like nobody's gonna just, pee openly in the middle of the floor. It's hard. And
most people won't. Yeah.
It's hard to tell your body to like just stop suppressing, and you get to like tick constipated, and it's horrible. And I can't find a way out of it. I think I found, so because I linked my heart rate to tick attacks and stuff, I just started having really bad panic attacks. In intimate cases with my boyfriend, and my heart rate got high, I just had panic attacks and screamed and yelled like I was being murdered and those sorts of things. So like intimately, it's been difficult. But I think you just have to, take the good when it comes and the bad when it comes in those situations, and try and just remain calm through a panic attack. That's the worst advice ever.
So how does all that jibe with you, just to set this up, you drive a race car, and that's an excitable environment, and there's that level of competition, which I'm sure is also fun too, and you can laser focus on things. But how does all this translate when you're doing something that is kind of high intensity like that? Or am I describing it the wrong way?
So I've got a video where I panic before. So I'm like, oh, maybe I can't do this. Maybe I won't suppress, and maybe like, I think some of it is like, some of my problems with suppressing is the fact that I know that like if I fully let go, and then I'm not able to get back to suppressing, then that I can't drive my race car anymore. Like I can't race, and then, I can't drive. And if I can't drive, then your head starts spinning. But yeah, when I'm actually in a race, I've got this video where, it's on a track day, my boyfriend's in the car beside me, and I'm ticking away. I'm hitting the helmet. I'm like, I'm ticking. I'm nervous. I'm, terrible. I'm really bad. And then as soon as I get on that racetrack, it just all disappears. And you can see like this laser focus type thing. I think in the 24, because I did the 24-hour race in a Citroen 2CV, if anyone knows that car. It basically goes highest of like 70 miles an hour. Like it's an old classic car it's slow, but it's so fun to drive, because when you go around the corners, you're sort of bumping around the corners, and you've got to keep the momentum up, and then there's aerodynamics involved. So it's a fun car to drive. But I did 24 hours driving with that. And so I was in a group of two other girls. So there's three of us. So it was kind of like 2 hours driving, 2 hours like sleeping. And then you had to sort of be in the garage like half an hour before. And that half an hour before, like, because you've kind of got your race suit and your helmet on in case the other person can't quite do the 2 hour stint and has to come in. So you're there prepared. And it's that moment where you're like, my eyes started going. I'm like, I'm going to have a tick attack. Oh, this is it. Like, and the thing is, like, I was in the group of with two other girls, and when Maria messaged me and said, hey, we got a 2CV, would you like to race it? I was like, sure, like, and arrange all this. And then I was like, I do have to tell you that I do have Tourette's. Like, hope that's okay. And she was like, yeah. And then she privately messaged me and she was like, hey, is there any tick triggers that like we need to know about? And I'm like, that's a really that's a good question. Like, awesome. That's how do you know about this? And turns out, she does like mind things and is interested in the mind things and that sort of thing. I knew that like it was a low pressure team and it was all, whereas because my boyfriend was with her fiance in the boys team, and they were like wanting to win. They were like laser focused. So I knew that like if there was anything, then another girl could just jump in and like I could have my tick attack and then get in. But yeah, I think it's the leading up to it, and it's the worry and all of that. And I suppressed. So for the 24 hours, I wasn't sure I could do 24 hours. And I was like, oh, this is terrible. I probably got less than 2 hours sleep. But then I managed to suppress all the way up to, and including, so we do the presentations, and I was like, oh, that's great. And then I got in the camper van and I had one of the worst tick attacks. It just wasn't stopping. It just was going on and on and on. And it was terrible. And I was like, well, I have to say goodbye and I have to try and drive, because I'd driven my Volkswagen camper, my T2 Volkswagen camper, my classic car, to the thing. And classic cars are terrible to sort of wrestle with and drive and that sort of thing. So it's like, well, I have to drive this home, and I'm having this massive tick attack. And luckily, like, you know, my boyfriend's mum jumped in and she was like, well, I'll take this camper and you know, your boyfriend can take your camper home. And then I was like, well, I just have to say goodbye to the team now. And I practically crawled to the team and just was like, I had a new tick that was like racing drivers, and then put a rude word in. And so I was screaming that like all the way along past all these racing drivers. But yeah, they loved it and they were fine. I looked one of them in the eye and said a really rude word. So yeah, and it was really good fun, and they took it all in their stride. So I'm really grateful for them.
So the contrast of going through a tick attack and then having a positive interaction with, you know, a group of people, just kind of, here's where I was, here's where I am now. The people around me are cool. They get it, you know.
I've never actually had a bad experience, I don't think, of telling anyone that I've got Tourette's or being around someone and like having it all come out. I did feel quite liberated after that experience, and I was like, okay. And I think after that, I did suppress less, sort of. But then I sort of then clam up and start suppressing again, and so it's nice to have those sort of fully. I don't get those fully out, fully just like sort of tick loud and proud moments. I don't get them very often. So it was a relief to get it out. It was, you know, a relief that I made it to say goodbye and then made it back to the camper.
Yeah.
It's a nice, the thing is with the racing team, it's a nice family friendly environment. It's just like, cause we all camp and it's all like, it's all that kind of thing. It's most of the time we're just doing it for fun, and it's all great. Sometimes it gets a bit stressful. So I was on the comms. So my boyfriend and his teammate were doing a 2-hour endurance race, and it had a pit stop, and so I was on the comms and I was making jokes that they put the Tourette's person on the comms, thinking it would be bad if I pressed the button and had like a retching tick for 2 hours. That would be fun for them.
Right.
But yeah, the thing is with that is that the first time I did it and we did a pit stop, and you know, to be fair, I was just doing the timing. Like there were, you know, we had people putting fuel in, and there's, you know, belts are being changed and that sort of thing. And I was just doing the timing, did the timing, went back on the pit wall to do the signs, because we didn't have the radios at that time. So we were just doing signs. And I just turned to one of my friends and I was like, you need to take over this board, because if not, this board is getting thrown on that track. Like, and then I started having like a mini tick attack on the pit wall, because my adrenaline had got up in the like pit stop, and like, then it triggered me. But yeah, usually I think the interesting thing about the interesting conversation about the racing for me and my boyfriend that we've gone back and forward about is the fact that if there was a crash, sort of / when, because there will be some sort of contact, I have to stop on the track. You the method is you get out and you go to a marshal's post. And I'm sure that I'd be fine to get out because the whole like preservation adrenaline will be kicking in, and it will be like get out and onto that like marshal's post.
Yeah.
But the thing that we've had a conversation about is when I get to the marshal's post is I'm probably going to have a tick attack. And like, how do I convey to this marshal that like everything's fine and that it's a tick attack and like I'm not like I haven't been hurt and this and that. And so it's, you know, we're sort of talking, well, should I wear some sort of bracelet, some sort of something? Like me and my boyfriend share a helmet because I don't have one of myself, and it says Tourette Squad on it. He got it, and it was quite a sweet thing for him to do.
Yeah.
So like in that sense, because he was like, well, you could just get something that says Tourette's on it. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't think the marshals will then connect Tourette's to this tick attack that they're seeing. Like you don't quite connect it in your head. So we're sort of banding different ideas about I don't know if you have it in America, but there's the hidden disabilities lanyard that we have in the UK. That's the sunflowers.
Yeah, there's a variation on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of taking off quite a lot in the UK. Sort of now it feels like it's not just airports. It's now going into shops and those sorts of things. And I was like, well, maybe I could put like a hidden disability sort of something on because there is a disability sticker of like somebody in a wheelchair with a crash helmet on. And I'm like, I'm not disabled. And that's sort of for someone who has motor disability type things. And well,
so the connotation's different.
It's like, well, I don't think I'd be comfortable putting that on because it's for somebody that can't get out of a car. So that sort of signals to the marshals that they need help. And I'm like, well, I'm not there, but afterwards I sort of am. So that's an interesting thing that, you know, we're talking about and hopefully figuring out. But yeah.
Has anybody involved in racing ever kind of worried that or questioned as to whether your TS is any kind of like liability for you while you're driving? Or I mean, has it been kind of cast that way that you've had to explain your way out of? Or
no. So you know, I've been on track with a few people. I think in the world of racing, you come across people who in the split second do silly stuff, and they will come out of the race and go, that was a silly move. And you're like, yes, that was. So I think that like, because by now I've got, you know, I've done enough races that they can be like, oh, actually, like, she doesn't do silly moves and that sort of thing. So I've never had a negative outcome. The 2CV race was the first time that I actually had the words Tourette's on the race car. So although people know and around me know, I don't think specifically all of the racing drivers specifically know that I have Tourette's.
I think you were saying before we started recording that somebody asked or has anybody asked about the sticker on your car, and have you explained it? Or
yeah, so when I was putting it on, so it wasn't my car. It is. We were a team called the Blueberry Tarts. So it is her car. So she let me put the sticker on, which was, you know, kind of her. And you know, we got some printed and we put the bigger ones on the car. And yeah, so when me and this other guy were putting them on, you know, he was like, oh, so Tourette's podcast, like, what is it? And I was like, oh, it's a podcast for Tourette's people. And then I was like, I should have said something different. I should have been inspirational in this moment. I should have, like, this was my chance to tell you.
We'll be right back. The Tourette Association of America has been around since 1972, and today is the premier nonprofit in the U.S. working for all people affected by Tourette and tic disorders. One of the ways that happens is through communications and awareness tools, which is one of the reasons why the Tourette Association is the primary sponsor of this podcast. They help me out a lot, and you can find tons of information on their website, tourette.org, TOURETTE.org. and I want to thank them for their support of Tourette's podcast.
The big thing that I'm trying to conquer and that I've always tried to conquer is to be like loud and proud with my tics, to actually, like, I'm loud and proud with saying that I have Tourette's, but actually to tick in public and not suppress, I just don't do it. That's kind of next step for me, kind of. Yeah. And to be fair, it has got so bad that I don't tick at home. Like I get in from work and I still don't tick. I sit on the couch and I still don't tick. And then yesterday my boyfriend got in, Friday night, and I only when he got in did I explode in Tourette's and just because he's my tick trigger, but he's also my safety blanket.
Yeah,
and it's weird how I can be sat alone and still not be my own safety blanket. So yeah, I think ticking out loud and proud. I just think people that have always had it, like, have accepted it. And, I look to them. There are some people, there's, Romany, and she's the wisest person, and she's a teenager, and, there's a lot of teenagers, and I look to them and I'm like, teach me about how you've accepted this Tourette's. Like, I don't understand, like, that sort of thing. And the other thing I did just want to say is that so in February I went for my interview, and I was in the interview, and I was like, I'd had the conversation of, do I, with my mom and my supervisor, I was like, do I say that I have Tourette's? Do I not say? And there's conflicting things. As people are like, don't tell them, you don't have to, and some people are like, tell them, you might as well, So I was, it felt right. So I told them, and I was like, oh, I've got Tourette's, and one of the interviewers turned around and be like, oh, my mate's got Tourette's. Like, that's, I play rugby with him. Like, I was like, oh, okay. And then, I told my other friend, and she was like, oh, yeah, I've got another friend that has Tourette's, and, he's out and proud about it and that sort of thing. And there was so many, like, in the space of like a week or two, there were so many people that I was like, oh, I have Tourette's. And I was almost expecting this big thing. And then it was like, it just was like, oh yeah, I know somebody that's like cool. So I think there are a lot of people out there now that are speaking up and saying that they have Tourette's and are out and proud with it and that sort of thing. So I think the most inspirational people to me are the teenagers that have it and that talk about it. And it's just the people that I know that have it and that like have really accepted it. I think they're the inspirational people to me. So
the people I think I can personally learn most from are young people and people who lived with TS in a time where nobody, in terms of just walking around knowledge of it, nobody knew what it was. I mean, you were a drug addict, or you were, you needed an exorcism, and how they dealt with it when there wasn't a community of, online discussion groups and things like that. And then looking at younger people who were able to really kind of have that sense of command, so important to me, and really, really encouraging to see someone at that young age and see a lot of people at young ages feel like they have a better starting point to feel better about it. And I feel like that is something I'm still learning about and trying to catch up on. And I guess trying to kind of connect my experience with theirs so I can feel the same way that they do about it.
I feel like the people who, lived in a time where, that there wasn't any knowledge about it. We've got one in the whole support group. He's amazing because he's fully accepted it, and he'll be like, I'll be like, oh, this, and he'll be like, yeah, yep. He's also great because he's like, you know what, I've trained myself that the loud vocal tics, I now do them small. So you can't hear him. Wow. Like he now whispers, he's trained himself to whisper his tics and that sort of thing. But I think that some of the stories and things, about, bad public experiences that people have had, I've never had that type thing. So I'm like, well, I can't relate to that in another thing. And I listened to, I think it was the first series of your show that was like, you know, people who don't have coprolalia fall into this trap of like, I have Tourette's, but it's not the coprolalia type. I don't swear. And that really resonated with me because I did that. I did that in my interview at work. I was like, oh, you know, I have Tourette's, but don't worry, I don't swear. I won't swear. And that obviously set me off. And I now have coprolalia. And between my interview and actually starting at work, I developed it. And I think it's weird because it was bouncing in my, like I had a lot of the swear words bouncing in my head. Like, do you get that where it's sort of like, I don't know whether that's part of the suppressing. It's like you're keeping them in, but they're still playing about in your head.
Totally. I definitely have. And this is something I hadn't really thought about at all until someone directly asked, you know, like, do you have like, you know, mental tics or tics that you don't do out loud, but are kind of banging around inside your head all day? And I definitely have that. The coprolalia thing of kind of separating yourself, and I mean, because I used to do that too, and I guess it's kind of like saying there's good and bad TS, and there's the bad kind, and be happy that I don't have the bad kind. I mean, it's such a
The thing is, like when I got coprolalia and like when I let the swear words out, so my mom put a rotten tomato in my face. It sounds worse than it is, like because I was chopping a tomato and it was rotten, and I was like I can't deal with this. So I went downstairs and I was like, Mom, you have to deal with this. I just can't deal with this because I just couldn't deal with it. Anyway, so she didn't quite understand. And so she put it in my face, and then so many swear words came out. I think it was because it was the surprise, and I was suppressing, and it just all came out. So I do tell my mom that she sighed it all off, which it's funny. But I felt almost relief. I felt like I sounded like I had Tourette's. Like
you've arrived. Like, you've made it.
I was like, wow, I sound like I have to, like this, you know, the fact that they're all out of my head and that I don't have to keep them all stuffing in my head and bouncing about, that's nice. And B, like, I do have Tourette's. Like, I sound like I have Tourette's now. I think, I hate the tics that come out and they don't sound like Tourette's. Like, I will turn to my boyfriend and say, I don't like you in a flat pan way, but he knows it's a Tourette's thing, and like, but it doesn't sound like Tourette's, and like it's those ones that like, because you go, is it a tic? Is it not a tic? Like, what is this type thing? And then you know, you go down that rabbit. I think that's another thing that like my engineering brain needs to know if it's a tic. Like, I have an OCD thing where I have to tell my boyfriend not to die, otherwise. You know, he might disobey me and go and, you know, do something silly. But no, I had like every morning I have to tell him, and he's fine with it because like it's just some weird kooky thing she says. I think people, whenever he races and I say it to him, people do look at me a bit weirdly. But yeah, no. For a while I was like, is this a tic? Is this OCD? Like, and my brain, because of the science, because of the engineering, it needs to like put them in a box, and it needs to just say, this is a tic. Like, and I'm trying to learn that that's not what you do. And it's like trying to be like, you know what? It doesn't matter if it's tic. Doesn't matter if it's like, it doesn't matter if it's anything. Like, and I think because the way I think, I'm like, if I define it, then I will then know the next step. So if it's a tic, then I'm like, oh, well, what's the tic trigger? And, you know, there are steps, but I just need to think, you know what? It is what it is. And, you know, maybe this is how I manage it, or like that sort of thing. It's a different way than the engineering brain thinks. And it's a struggle, and it's, you know, you're having to like reprogram your brain into this more emotional, biological thinking way. It's hard, like, so yeah.
I really liked that the soundtrack or the score, the original score for the movie Motherless Brooklyn, was jazz and sort of had this loose kind of, like there's kind of a chaos to jazz. There's a looseness to jazz and that sense of improv, which I thought was really, really appropriate for that movie, with Tourette Syndrome being a central factor in it. Just because I feel like it is kind of necessarily that loose line drawing, artistic kind of, I feel like that was a nice touch and a nice way to kind of carry that vibe of TS and that sort of like anything goes kind of feel to it. Because when you're talking about Coprolalia and the separation from it of like, but I don't do that. You never know what's coming. And it could be coming for me. It could be coming for TS can affect anybody, and it can affect somebody in your family. It's not. I mean, we say it's rare and we say it's uncommon. It's kind of not when the degrees of separation that what you were talking about earlier. Like, oh, well, my brother has TS, and you meet somebody who has that frame of reference, and I feel like that feels kind of fairly common to me. But because of that, it's a great reminder, I think, to everybody in the world that, like, this could set on for you. This could set on for one of your kids. This is something that people need to understand better and educate themselves better.
Yeah, I think like people like Billie Eilish, and you've got the footballer Howard something.
Tim Howard, yeah.
Tim Howard, those people are like, yeah, I've got Tourette's, and they do it in the natural way of like, yeah, Billie Eilish is like, yeah, I've got it, but we're not talking about it because it doesn't define me. Like, let's talk about music, like, those types of people, and you can all look up to, and those sorts of things. I think the thing that scares me, and the thing that I don't think worries my boyfriend, he doesn't worry, but the thing that sort of is you don't know what's around the corner. And my level of Tourette's at the moment seems worse than it was 4 years ago when I first started, and my handling of it is actually so much worse because now I have the panic attacks, and I can't, like, I get so scared of the tick. I'm so scared of the tick attacks, and they have got worse, and they with the breathing tics, once you've had a breathing tic, you're just scared of the breathing tic and trying to get over that. And I think, the next, not the next stage, but like the fear is always, this will get worse. I see people who have Tourette's and need wheelchairs and those sorts of things. And, because I'm like, well, it just suddenly came on. And then I'm like, oh, well, what happens if it suddenly gets to this stage? And like, so I think, that kind of is in the back of my mind always. Like, it's always like, oh no. But yeah.
Well, I guess that's a
downer note. Let's
no. Well, I was going to pop it back up and say, like maybe that's all the more reason to, kind of
race while you can.
Yeah. Do what you can and get used to the involuntary circumstances of your life, to where even if they don't make sense to you, they at least make sense in the sense that they're familiar and it's part of you and all that. And it sounds like a platitude and everything, but I mean,
it's that road to acceptance. I always say that the road to acceptance for Tourette's is like the 7 stages of grieving. So, my mom got stuck up on the denial. Like when the doctor was diagnosing me with Tourette's, she was in the room going, it's not Tourette's. And I'm like, shut up, Mom. I've been waiting for this for years. Like, but yeah, she got stuck up on the denial stage. And, my boyfriend is amazing. He jumped straight to the acceptance stage because he's awesome. And,
that's so cool.
I got on the need to figure it out. Like, just I kind of batter about the stages, and it's just that trying to get that acceptance, I think, for me. And like, I think no matter how bad it gets, and no matter how bad the Tourette's gets and the tic attacks get, I think I'm always safe in the knowledge that my boyfriend can sleep through any tic attack. I think he is an amazing sleeper, and he always says like, get me if you need me, but he will then just like be snoring away, and I'll be like vibrating the whole bed and that sort of thing. So
that's the dating service we need to pair us up with people who can sleep and who can who can deal with it in some way. I think people thought that I sponsored a race team or something. Like that was the initial reaction.
Yeah, like that was a big sticker. Like, that costs a lot, Yeah. Well, I'm going to run, like, I don't know what racing I'll do next year, but I will run your stickers next year because
awesome. That's so cool.
Because like it's just a way of putting it on there, and it's like, it's a friendly way of seeing the words Tourette's and that sort of thing, and it does spark a conversation. I would say that like all of my socials I'm very bad at socials and like stay in contact. If you wanted to put the PDC Racing, we have Instagram, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, we have a website. Okay. That's kind of where people can know about what my next race is, and if if like they're in the UK, then they can come see me.
Esther was cool enough to tell me that she had an extra Tourette's podcast sticker that she hadn't used yet, or wasn't planning to use. It's a decent size sticker, by the way. She's got one, and she's happy to mail it along with a racing team hat to one lucky person. By the way, the racing team hat doesn't have the podcast logo on it. It's just for the racing team, which is called Power Distribution Control Racing. And this is tough because there's only one set of these to give away. But I will say this is not the last of the giveaways. I'm working on this. There will be more ahead. But here's the deal. It's got to be a trivia question from the podcast. And here it is. What is the kind of car that Esther raced this year in the 24-hour endurance race? Like the make and the model, the kind of car. She definitely mentions it 2 or 3 times. What's the car? First person to email me at tourettespodcast@gmail.com with the correct answer gets a decent-sized Tourette's Podcast sticker and a PDC racing hat from Esther, who I want to thank for offering that. It's really cool of her. Just go ahead and put the correct answer in the subject line of your email. And then you can add a note in the body of the email if you want. tourettespodcast@gmail.com. First person to get it right, I'll look at the time the email was sent and the time I received the email. We'll get the sticker and the hat from Esther. It's so hard to make that fair, just considering the different time zones and different people coming to this at different times, but no worries. I'll do more of this more broadly next time, the next giveaway. This is just kind of a one-off. Also going to post a video on tourettespodcast.com of her driving, of Esther driving, racing, and it's a cam inside the car. And it's capturing the dialogue. It starts out with her just kind of going through it in her mind of, okay, ticking, but I've got to do this race, and it's just a real conquering right there on video with Esther in her race car. Oh, and thanks to everybody for letting me know that tourettespodcast.com wasn't updating. On my end, it was. I mean, it looks updated, but on everybody else's end, no. I put a ticket in. Think it's about to be fixed. A website with good updates is tourette.org, the website of the Tourette Association of America, the primary sponsor of this podcast. Big thanks to them. If you go to tourette.org, you can check out great things coming up. There's one thing I found on their blog. Just click on blog at the top of the website at tourette.org, and the latest post as I speak is about a Facebook Live event coming up. It's Thursday, November 21st at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a Facebook Live event discussing the transition from childhood to adulthood with TS. It says right here, quote, "Through self-advocacy, as well as recognizing and utilizing their strengths, young adults can feel empowered to take control over their life." End quote. So this is from the Tourette Association, and it'll be with Dr. Mark Schmidt and Dr. Anthony Rostaine, if I'm pronouncing that right. You can read their bios, and there's a link to the live session. And you can also submit your own questions on a form here. Again, just go to tourette.org and click on blog. It's a post from a few days ago, November 12th, about transitioning to adulthood with TS, and you can learn about this. You can get all the details, November 21st, 11 a.m. EST. The Tourette Association is doing a lot more adult-focused programming, which is fantastic. I'll keep you informed on things they have going on in future episodes here. Thanks so much for all the feedback and emails, tourettespodcast@gmail.com, and the Instagram interaction and the correspondence on the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook. I have to thank Sophia for her admin skills there. Big shout out to discussion group member Ingrid, who finally started listening to the podcast. She's been aware of the podcast for a long time, and like a lot of people, was worried that it would kind of, upset her tics and kind of bring things back. And I'm so happy she's listening now. I got to meet her out in Los Angeles just recently. It was so much fun talking to her. And to the sound of my dog drinking water in the background, I'll say I'm still working on that photography post for tourettespodcast.com, because I heard from a lot of you, and I want to respect that and read through your feedback to the talk from episode 6 of this season with Mr. Move and Speak about photography as a great way to reduce anxiety and connect with uncomfortable environments and so on. Deal with anxiety. Definitely helps me. We have lots of responses to that. So that's coming up. Thanks for listening, and keep reaching out. Suggestions, comments, feedback, or just say hi. tourettespodcast@gmail.com or the contact form at tourettespodcast.com. And don't forget this and other fantastic podcasts at geeksrising.com. Shout out to Bandrew at Geeks Rising for continuously, one of them being amazing. Huge support to the show. I'll be in touch. Thanks for listening, and keep reaching out. Suggestions, comments, feedback, or just say hi. tourettespodcast@gmail.com or the contact form at tourettespodcast.com. I'll be in touch. This is Ben.